Hello, everybody. Trying to look good for you all. Um, well, first, let me just say a couple of things in opening episode 27 of my life history. The thumbnail I keep using was made by a friend of mine. It was a computer generated picture of me that he made when he was about, I don't know, maybe 9 to 11 or something. And I'm still using it. And I won't say his name because I don't know if he would want to be involved in the project of this by name. So yeah, and also a couple of the videos I made didn't get loaded, so I don't know. I might have left something important out. I hope not. Okay, getting right back to the chronology. I am now living in the village in Belize known as Rancho. The inhabitants are mostly people of Asian Indian descent and a few Americans, one Indian, and a few Americans, of which I'm one, and the rest were all right-wing evangelical Christians who had just descended on the town, on the village, like a plague of locusts, as they do everywhere. But I had the dubious fortune of being in the right place, I guess, at the right time to actually watch it happen in real time. Yeah, and it's, it was kind of a hate relationship. I was friendly with some of them for a while. Some of them I was never really friendly with, and I was a lot actively dueling with them. So first of all, to explain my belief system at the time, which I had when I first encountered them, I had, I had been with the children of God for a few months when I was 13. Prior to that, I had had the view that all religions are simultaneously true, or at least were when they were first connected, which is similar to the Baha'i point of view, and to universalists of various kinds. And then when I joined the cult as the Children of God, I didn't stay a member for very long, but I left with some lingering beliefs. So they were posing as, they also were fundamentalist Christians, basically Protestants, who believed that although they didn't call themselves such, they believed that the Bible was literally true, all of it. Yes, all of it was literally true. But they also pitched themselves. Remember, this started in the 60s, and I got into it, well, in 1976 was the year that I got into it and then left it. So their particular pitch was, yes, everything in the Bible is true. Yes, Jesus is the only way to salvation, and so on and so on. And we have a new prophet who's alive and running things and telling us what's what. But also they were appealing to the hippies and leftists and countercultural types of the time. So they were like, yes, the hippies were on the right track. America is bad. Its government is bad. It's inherently bad. God thinks it's bad, and it will be judged first before the rest of the world is. We're sex positive. Yeah, we lean far left politically in most ways. We believe in socialism. At one point, he even said we pray I pray that the Soviet Union becomes stronger and the USA becomes weaker, although obviously he didn't predict that the world would eventually become Marxist-Leninist. He believed that it would become some kind of back to the land socialist, godly socialist, with him in charge as king, of course. Later, I learned a lot of that was just a marketing pitch to the American public at the time, and it worked pretty well. But he was perfectly capable of pretending to be an anti-communist crusader as well if it suited his purpose. Oh yes, and he believed that new is better. So he believed that his form of Christianity, which was the new form of Christianity, was better and better suited to young people, especially, whereas the older forms that all what he called system churches were practicing was obsolete and outdated. Now, I've covered a lot of that in previous videos, but I'm just reviewing it because I still held a lot of these beliefs 2 years later, when I encountered right-wing evangelical, right-wing evangelicals, which I had never before encountered. I guess I'd listened to them rant on the street, but I had never really talked to them. So here come the missionaries. I remember Brother Harley. There's this middle-aged guy named Brother Harley. They called each other brother and sister, and presumably all the other people who converted were also fell under the category of brother and sister. So there was Brother Harley, middle-aged guy I didn't care for, his wife, and there were a couple younger ones, young. There was one or two young women. I don't know if they were daughters or what. And there was also an elderly, actual first generation Indian woman among the evangelicals. And she had come there. They had brought her there because they thought her Indianness would make it, better for them to relate to her. And I don't think it really worked out that way, because they had pretty well lost most of their Indianness by this time. But I remember her sermon. She said, "What is the national language of India?" And I said, "English." And she said, "No, it's Hindi." But I think I was right. And then she said, "I came here expecting there to be here a Hindu temple, there a Hindu temple, but it turns out that there's no Hinduism here," which was true. So Brother Harley gives me one of his tracts, and I read it, and this was the first time I encountered that kind of right-wing evangelical belief system, which basically said that everything that was not them and everything that was new was basically satanic. So, they believe that other religions are satanic, probably including other, Catholics and other forms of Christianity. Rock music is satanic, drugs are satanic. Left-wing politics, communist and socialism and so forth is satanic. Basically, everything except them is satanic. And in indigenous American beliefs and indigenous African beliefs and all of that stuff definitely coming directly from the mind and mouth of the heart of darkness, who could be, oh, I don't know, Satan? Yes, Satan. So I talked to him and I said, well, it seems like this, according to this tract, like you're against everything that's new. And he said, oh, no, it's not new, it's old. Because, of course, everything new was being linked to the paganism that had been in existence in Old Testament in the time when the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, was being composed. And the prophets of the time, even though they were real, it was still being practiced in Israel at the time. I mean, I didn't know it, they didn't know it, but basically it was this prophets of these new religions combating the older, yes, they were older religions of the Middle East at that time, which had been practiced by King Solomon and basically everyone prior to that. But after the Hebrews returned from captivity in Babylon, sponsored by the Persians, who were Zoroastrians, and introduced this dualistic view of good versus evil into the Jewish/Abrahamic mindset. Yeah, that's when they stopped becoming Hebrews and became Jews. So that's a little biblical history, which I didn't exactly know. I didn't know most of that at the time, but nevertheless, that's what was happening. So, for example, there were Baha'i missionaries there. There were a couple of Baha'i missionaries, and they were pretty chill, as you would expect from their belief system, which was that the prophets of all the major world religions had been correct when it first started, and then it got corrupted by ego and so forth. And I had already been inclined to universalism, and then Moses David, leader of the Children of God, wrote a tract, a Mo letter called Baha'i Shrine Prophecy or something. So I was sympathetic to their perspective, but I didn't convert. And so this guy, Brother Harley, he was standing up in church one night, and he said, so what do these guys talk about? Baha'u'llah? Well, that's the same thing. It's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. Anti-God, anti-Christ. It was Baha'i, not Baha'u'llah. He had confused them with some Old Testament demon, and he didn't bother, of course, to investigate his mistakes because confirmation bias. So that was one example. I remember one night he stood up. This was 1977, yes. Or no, 1978. He said, well, there's a new communist nation, Afghanistan. The Russians invaded them, and now it's communist. In retrospect, it might have been better for the United States and the world if Afghanistan had remained communist. But of course, it didn't, because of Islamicist extremists, largely USA funded, and Saudi Arabia funded, which derives from our petrodollars and so forth. Anyways, they fought for decades and decades until the Muslims took control again, but without the old monarchy, total chaos, terrorism, 9/11, and so forth. But of course, he wasn't a prophet, and he didn't know any of that was going to happen. He just didn't like communism. Okay. One night, we were not in the church in the village. We were a good ways from it, like miles. I don't know, maybe a couple miles away from Rancho, where I was staying. And it was pouring rain. It was one of those tropical thunderstorms, lightning storm. Well, no, I'm wrong. It wasn't a lightning or a thunderstorm, but it was pouring rain heavily. And here's Father Harley standing on his pulpit, his stage, and he says, if there's anybody here who's not here to praise God, to praise Jesus, they should just get up and leave. And then he goes silent, and then a minute later he just says, I'm just getting that if there's anyone here who's really not really here to just praise God and praise Jesus, he should just get up right now and just leave. Now, I was, in my mind, I was there. I was into Jesus. He wasn't all I was into, but he was something that I was into. But then I thought, he's so full of shit. None of these people, regardless of why they're here, whether out of politeness or for something to do, on a night, in a place without to do at night, or whatever, they are not going to get up and leave because, they're polite. They don't want to make a spectacle. They don't want to be talked about negatively. And besides, it's pouring dark and pouring down rain outside. And I thought, I just have to I have to call this guy out non-verbally. So I got up and left myself and started walking on the road back to town, fully prepared to walk for miles in this dark rainstorm. And I was doing that until at some point the Evangelicals in their motor vehicle stopped and picked me up and took me back to town. And one of them, I don't know if she said some Belizean term like he's upstart or something like that. But, and I don't know if I succeeded in any way shaming them or making them think twice about their pomposity and hypocrisy, which was my intent. So that's that crew. Meanwhile, there was this other couple of Americans. Wait, before I move on to them, I want to tell a story. So the so-called coolies there, the East Indian descended people, they all spoke Belizean Creole primarily, but the younger ones and even the middle-aged ones could understand and speak standard English. But some of the old folks really couldn't. So this old Indian from India woman visited somebody, and there was this old Indian descended woman, and I don't know what to call her. I don't even remember her name, but either of their names. Native Indian woman says to the son, does she speak English? And he said, she mostly just speak this broken Creole. She mostly just speaks Belizean Creole, aka broken English, is what he meant. And then she started preaching to this, Belizean older, woman with her Indian accent that this woman had never heard, and with worldly metaphors that this woman, had no idea what she was talking about. So she said, and when I was in Israel, this and that happened, and this is a metaphor for why you need Jesus, blah, blah. And it was just kind of sad because the other older woman just kept saying, I don't understand you. I don't understand you. And the whole thing was just really so awkward. And, nobody could really act as a translator because they didn't really fully understand what she was saying anyway. It's like, so, yeah, that happened. Okay. And then here comes two other evangelical Christians, a husband and wife, younger, maybe in their 30s. And so a bit easier for me to relate to. They didn't immediately come across as dinosaurs. That took a while, but so I met with them, and they gave me this like children's Bible story book, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? This book is for children. If I want to read the Bible, I can read it in the original." And he said, "Okay." So I did read the entire New Testament. I'd only read John, I think, and maybe Genesis. But now I read the entire New Testament, and I did get why it was a compelling story. The part where Jesus is on the cross and he asked for wine and they gave him vinegar. That was kind of, I felt like I could taste the vinegar in my own like mouth. And I actually, because these people I was staying with were illiterate, I read to them sometimes. I'm not sure if they appreciate it. At one point, I was reading the Bible until one of the young adult in the next room said, "It's so noisy, I can't even go to sleep." So I stopped reading. And yeah, I stopped. Anyway, so then I read the New Testament, King James Version, and then they asked me if I wanted to get baptized. And I said, sure. The children of God didn't believe in water baptism because John the Baptist said that I baptize with water, but there is one who will come after me, who baptizes with fire and with the Holy Spirit, which everyone assumes meant Jesus, although he didn't say so, and didn't. I don't know if he. Well, anyway, but so the children of God just had you say first. They had you say this prayer asking to let Jesus into your heart, and presumably after you had said this prayer, asking him to forgive you and come into your heart, you would not go to hell. You would go to heaven, maybe not be the most exalted, but you would go there no matter what else you did. And I'm like, was cool. And I'm still like, cool. I hope they're right because, they're Baptists and such who believe that too. And then when they wanted to do what they called a baptism, they would have you say another prayer asking the Holy Spirit to come into you. And after that, they believed that you were capable of receiving the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. At what Acts said, speaking in the tongues of men and angels. And its technical term is glossolalia, and a lot of Pentecostalists do it. But it took me a long time. It wasn't until recently that I saw another one outside of the Children of God that I actually heard some speaking of tongues come out of her mouth. at another evangelical church. So, anyhow, all of which is to say that I had never had a water baptism. So I'm like, yeah, why not have a water baptism? Sure. So they took me to this little pond and, they did immersion baptism. I dunked my head underwater and they said, you're new. When I came out, there was this young woman with Down syndrome, could not talk at all. Probably had something wrong with her liver too. She had yellow eyes, yellow in the whites of her eyes. But when I held, this is what I always do. When I go underwater, I hold my nose and I came back up. And this young woman or teenage girl with Down syndrome was laughing, and she like imitated me holding my nose. So that's funny. Yeah, so I was going along with their thing up to a certain point, and then they left. They left and they went back. Well, they moved to Orange Walk, which is in northern Belize, pretty close to the Mexican border. In fact, they would go regularly into Chetumal, the border town of Mexico, to buy food at a cheaper rate in bulk. So I went up, they had told me I could, I guess. I went up and visited them, and I had never seen Orange Walk before. So I went up. There was a blackout at the time, and the guy was like saying, "Yeah, it's cool living in another country. For example, I've never experienced a blackout before, and such like." But then things started to get a little bit heavy. So first of all, she asked me, "Did you really come to see us, or did you come to just have a place to stay because you wanted to see Orange Walk?" And I'm like, maybe I'm kind of busted. I don't know, but anywho, but they were talking. So they were both there, husband and wife, and the guy was talking to me about the Bible, and I don't know why he brought this up. It was a mistake for him to bring it up, but he said, I read the Paul's epistle to Philemon, the book of Philemon, and it said that if you're going to be a slave, you should be the best slave you can possibly be. And I was like, what, like, what? I could simply not, I could not accept that the Bible told slaves to be passively acceptant of their slavery. And it turns out that at least the New Testament did not. The book of Philemon was much more ambiguous. It was written about a slave to a slave master, and basically said, the slave master, I think they were both Christians, and the slave, he told the slave master to be super nice to the slave, I guess, but he didn't tell the slave to be the best slave possible. But he assured me that that was what the Bible said, and we believe that every single thing in the Bible is right? So this began to crack that paradigm open. I'm thinking, well, if the Bible really says that, and I was, I had been living among, being friends with, having intimate relations with Black people of different kinds who were the descendants of slaves. I knew that, and I knew a fair bit about America. I knew enough about American history to know that had happened. And I'm like, I just can't accept that. And if that means that not everything the Bible says is true, then maybe not everything the Bible says is true. And that already had planted a seed of doubt before he was going to say the next thing that he was going to say, which had to do with premarital sex being taboo, unacceptable in the eyes of God. And even though I was still mostly in this vaguely asexual phase for really spiritual reasons, I still could not accept that categorically premarital sex is wrong, is sinful. And I mean, I was struggling with the concept, and he said, you've been with the girls down here, right? I said, yeah. And he said, those girls aren't virgins anymore. And I said, they already weren't when I was with them. And he said, well, you didn't help them any. Yeah, I may not have helped them, but I don't think I hurt them much either. I don't know. Anywho, yes, I said, God loves everybody. He said, and he's going to send a lot of people to hell. And this is like, wow, that little crack of doubt, like just turning into a Grand Canyon, because it's like he seems to be saying that the act of consensual premarital sex is such great a sin that people who practice it are in danger of burning in the eternal fires of hell. I mean, I put it all together, right? And that really, really, really shook up my paradigm. I did not know what I was. I became an agnostic for years, and I still kind of am, even though I'm, a Buddhist as well. I currently identify as an agnostic Buddhist, which is I won't explain right now. But yeah, he he had the opposite effect. But sooner or later, I would have had to face that I did not really believe and was not really interested in buying what these people were selling. Meanwhile, the children of God went in the opposite direction and got freakier and freakier about sexual things, to the point where they really, really were doing bad things, unethical, illegal, everywhere kinds of things. But I didn't know about that till much later. But of course, they could find biblical stuff to justify that, at least in the early stages. And then they didn't have to, because Moses David's words were of equal, fundamentalist truth as the Bible was. But yeah. When people say that right-wing evangelicals, Christians cherry pick from the Bible, that is absolutely true. But as I've gotten more into studying the Bible, which has become somewhat of an obsession with me, now that I'm not a believer in it, I became more fascinated with it than ever, which is not uncommon. A lot of atheists and neo-pagans are more are more knowledgeable about what the Bible actually says than the evangelical Christians who claim to be able to believe it all. And that's largely because they don't cherry pick it. Somebody else has already cherry picked it for them. And they are mostly just know about what their preacher said in their mega church, on their cable network, or in their little church, and in their tracts that they give out. That's what they know from the Bible out of context and so forth. But also, there are so many and so frequent and such constant contradictions in the Bible from start to finish. Sometimes one sentence contradicts the one before it and so forth. That anyone who claims to follow it really has to cherry pick it, because there's no other way. You cannot believe that everything is true in a book that contradicts itself that much. Okay, so this was my sort of crisis of faith. Okay, so I guess I've talked about that enough for now. Yeah. So I'm living in this house in Rancho. I remember. Last video, I talked about the bugs, but I forgot to talk about the ants. There were so many different kinds of ants in Belize and even just in Rancho. I remember one day going into the front yard and hearing this crunch, crunch, crunch. And I looked over and I saw leafcutter ants. Leafcutter ants cut bits off of leaves of large trees. I don't know if these were banana trees or what, but they had large leaves. And then they carry them to a place which is actually a farm. And then they grow mushrooms, they cultivate mushrooms there, and they harvest them and they eat them. So yeah, this is ant agriculture. I didn't really know that then, but it was pretty interesting. There were also these teeny little, I mean really teeny little ants. And they were a pain in the ass because they could get through any kind of hole, or they always showed up and they showed up in your rice, and they called them wee ants. Here's my guess as to why they called them that. The Scottish, in Scotland, the word wee means little, all right? And in British West Indian English, repeating a word is a way of intensifying it. So say, he good, that's very good. He bad, that's very, very bad, If he loud, that means he's really loud, and so forth. So I think somebody coined the term about these ants because they were wee, meaning very little. So that's one kind of, a second kind of ants. There was a third kind I discovered. They were fairly big and black. And the way I discovered it was I was like leaning against something, a wall, something that a small creature could walk on. And this ant just clamped its mandibles into my ear. And I was like, what the heck? And I pulled it off, and it was a black ant. So that was the ants in Livingston. Now, in the village of Barranco, I encountered an even more dramatic a highly dramatic type of ant, which is the army ant. So I was walking with one of the white American dudes I was staying with, and there was this, bunch of ants on the ground, and he said, "Those are army ants." I vaguely knew what that was, but he said, "Do you have them at your place?" And he said, "No, if they came to our place, we'd have to evacuate, we'd have to move." And later I learned on nature documentaries, army ants are absolutely destructive. They march in columns, in large groups, and they just eat anything in their path, anything that is alive or was alive, will just get devoured unless you get the hell out of the way before they get to you. So fortunately, we were not in their way. Of course, I've mentioned the fire ants, maybe these stinging little, they're actually wingless wasps, but you see them. Well, you feel them maybe before you see them, and they do bite, and it does hurt. It does make you go ouch and feel like you're burning. One time when I was going to school in Punta Gorda and we went out to their farm, they were teaching the kids, book learning, but also some agricultural skills, which makes sense there. And I saw this ant just rolling and flipping around and squeaking, and it was covered with these biting fire ants. And I immediately stepped on it, to put it out of its misery. And the other guys saw that and thought it was a little strange because, like, how shall I say? I think being empathetic to animals in that way kind of generally speaking, it comes from people who have a certain level of material wealth and comfort, so that the needs of themselves and the humans around them, at least in their immediate circles, are reasonably, not food insecure, and have their basic needs taken care of. And so people in developing countries, you will find a lot less of that sort of thing where, I immediately tune in to the suffering of that poor little ant. I mean, mouse. The ants that I killed, I don't care. I don't even care about killing a mouse, but I did care about its suffering. Well, Rancho. So I went on a little crusade to kill I don't know if I mentioned this last time, to kill the vermin in the house in Rancho. And I did manage to get rid of the mosquitoes, but there were also rats. And, eating the flour on the newspapers and such. I tried to get rid of them, but it didn't work very well. And, okay. So before I get to the point where I am going to leave Belize, let me talk to you. Let me just mention some things that happened I still took regular trips to Punta Gorda when I was living in Rancho. It was only 5 miles away, and it wasn't that hard to catch a ride. I remember one, I don't know if I told this story already. I was talking to one Belizean who knew that I had lived in that house with 4 young females. And he said, well, which one of them, did you have carnal relationships with? He said, not exactly in those words. And I said, well, all of them. And he said, that's what I heard. As soon as one finished with you, Ross, no, as soon as one finished with you, the next one grab your Ross. And he was like, and why you not live there anymore? And I said, well, I got kind of tired of them, which was true. It was more complicated than that. But he said, basically to the effect of, I used to be a man, but he said, now you a solid punk. And then he said, well, me no the one that going to feel it. You lone one gonna feel it. He said, basically you used to be a man, you used to be masculine, but now you're a punk, which basically meant effeminate, sometimes used to mean gay. And he said, but it doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to feel it, meaning the physical suffering that goes along with not having sex. And he said, I'm not going to feel it. You're the only one that's going to feel it. So he was pretty much Ross. I mean, yeah. So the thing about those Catholics and Protestants that were trying to teach their morality, their sexual morality especially, to the locals is, boy, was it an uphill battle, because they were, no matter how often they went to church, scratch the surface, and they're not having any of it, especially when it comes to sex, and they don't have any respect for anyone that does. And there was a weird exception, sort of exception, so I'll get to that. So a second time, I was in Punta Gorda visiting, and somebody said, hey, there's a couple of Americans that want to talk to you. And so I went. This was weed smoker's house that I had been told never to go to, and certainly never to smoke weed in, because I would get busted if I did. But I ignored this rule because these two people were Rainbow Family people who I'd hung out with, and one of them had been quite helpful to me when I was in Guatemala, and they had just gone from Livingston to Punta Gorda, and they had asked about me, and I had happened to show up while they were there. So, of course, we smoked some weed, and they talked. One of the guys who lived there said, yeah, we're just black hippies. And one of the Rainbow Family guys said, yeah, I have a problem when there's alcohol there. I can't stop. I don't stop drinking. And the woman, who was kind of his girlfriend, said, well, I've seen you stop. And he said, well, I must have either run out of money or the bar ran out of booze. And anyway, it was nice seeing them again. It was a reunion. And yeah, I met one of them, a different friend from Guatemala, American friend, in the town of Placencia later. But anyway, I did that, and then I went, back to Rancho, and then I went back to visit Punta Gorda, and there was a different American guy that I did not know. And he got invited into the weed smoker house, and I got invited. And since I had already, crossed that threshold, that particular taboo, I went in and smoked some weed. with the the locals and the other American dude who turned out to be an idiot, and we got busted. And the local police, the police there, like the police in England, in the United Kingdom at the time, they did not carry guns. They carried little clubs. And so we got busted, and this American guy, we're not handcuffed, we're not in a car, there's no guns pointed at us. And so this idiot says, maybe we can get away. And he starts walking quickly, and I start walking next to him. And then they say, stop. I stop. He keeps going, but I stop because suddenly I realize, like, even if I could get away, where the hell am I going to go? I live around here, And so I stopped. Well, they got him. They did actually wind up hitting one of the local guys with their little club. I do remember he had blood on his head, so that's not good. They took me and the other American guy to the jailhouse. And the other guy said, I am so offended about this. I am so angry. I've never been treated that way in a British colony before. Like, he spent his time visiting different British colonies, like what was left at the time: Hong Kong, Falkland Islands, Rock of Gibraltar, Northern Ireland. My point is, there weren't that many, and I am skeptical that he'd ever been to one. Anyway, one of the cops said, well, you were smoking weed. And he said, I wasn't smoking weed. And even if I was, it's none of your business. I don't care where in the world you are. If you get arrested, or even if you haven't yet gotten arrested, mouthing off to the cops like that, which I've done and didn't, I regretted it. But in this case, I had the sense not to. It's never a good idea. It's always a bad idea, and it'll never make the situation better, and it'll quite frequently make it worse, which is what happened to him. So he said, one of the cops said, so you are very upstart, meaning basically, you're a smart ass, you're, that sort of thing. And then he said to one of the other cops, he said, lock the punk up. And so they didn't like him. They thought he was, again, punk meaning a sissy, effeminate, or gay, or just somebody they didn't like, an all-purpose insult. Just like fag or something is in the US. So they locked him up. And then they did not lock me up. They just kind of chewed me out. So one of them said something. I was still stoned, and I was really scared. And I remember I prayed to God. I was apparently still a believer. I said, I said, this is what's known as in Narcotics Anonymous as the addict's prayer, which is like, God, if you get me through this one, I'll never do such and such again. And that was basically it. I said to myself, God, if you get me out of this one, I will never smoke marijuana in Belize again. So, I had plenty of wiggle room there, but I had made that particular vow. And so the cop asking me something, and I started responding in standard English because I had been stopped a number of times already by the police in back in the USA and Guatemala, actually. And but in the USA, I knew that, you know, the best thing is to talk as politely and as formally, you know, as possible. So I started doing that, and then one of them said, "Talk to us in Creole." So I started talking in Belizean Creole, answering the questions. And he asked me, I guess he asked me if I smoked weed, and I think I also said no, but with no added attitude. And he said, "You smoked this one, you smoked." Okay, sorry. There was this guy whose name was, he was an American living in Belize. He went by, of his own choice, the word N-word, actually not that word, but what it stands for, N-word Charlie. I remember he was a musician, I guess, and I had seen a poster in Belize City advertising that N-word Charlie was playing, but he mostly lived around Punta Gorda and Rancho, and he had this really, he'd been a Berkeley street person, and he was spiritually arrogant. He thought he was similar, and I'm not real sure why he stayed there because he didn't seem to like it much. But he was a notorious weed. Bringing it back, he was a notorious weed smoker. But I never actually smoked weed with him. But the cop said, "You smoked weed with this person. You smoked weed with N-word Charlie." And anyway, they were calling me out, and basically they were correct. And also my visa had expired, which was basically, again, that was something back then that you would get scolded for, but not really much else. And they only gave you 2-week visas, so come on, man. But but on the other hand, they didn't really do much if you ignored them. So, and then he said something like, "You're having sex with those girls," meaning the ones in the house, yeah, down the street. And he said, "You're underage to be doing those things." I'm underage to be doing those things. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because I happen to know that there are 2 members of the Punta Gorda police force who came to that house regularly with the intention, which one of them was able to fulfill pretty quickly. The other one, it took longer and he had to pay for it. But anyway, these were grown adult members of the Belize City, of the Punta Gorda town police force who went to the same house that I had been living in specifically for the purpose of having sex with a 14-year-old girl who was younger than me and succeeding in doing so to varying degrees. And so I'm thinking, yeah, this is a bit hypocritical, but really, I think they just said that because, well, they were generally scolding me, going through a list of things that I was not technically supposed to be doing there. And that's pretty much just about it. It was another excuse to scold me. And then they let me go, and I got a ride back to Rancho. So now I had vowed not to smoke marijuana in Belize again. And so, of course, I started looking for other things I could use instead. Once I went to the pharmacy in Belize and bought a couple of Valiums and took them. No prescription needed. When I had been in Guatemala with the Rainbow family as some Garifuna, I mentioned I had accidentally taken a mix of psilocybin mushrooms and poison mushrooms, which resulted in me being both high and quite sick all day long. But the upshot of that was that they did teach me how to actually tell which mushrooms were really psilocybin mushrooms. And so, yeah, I knew how to do this. So I told, I think his name was Charlie. He was one of the, I guess, older teens or young adults there. The oldest one didn't like me, although he only said so when he was drunk. The rest of the time, he just kind of implied it. But the next oldest one and the one before that, so there were basically two guys there that I didn't like me, and I didn't really like. But anywho, I told this guy, I said, I think there are mushrooms growing around here that will get you high if you eat them. And what you have to do to get them is to wait until it rains, and then the next morning you get up not before the sun comes up, but before the sun really starts to get hot. And you go into a cow pasture, which there was one nearby, and you go look at the cow pies, the pieces of cow poo. And what you're looking for is these gray mushrooms with the heads have like a brown circular stripe in the middle and another little brown tip at the top. And then you like flick it with your fingers, and if they turn blue, then they're psilocybin. So we did that. I started off by eating two. So he, who'd never I'd taken him before, he hadn't, so he also took two. And yeah, we got pretty high. We kind of both got on our own wavelength, though. There was they had a radio, and it was playing Radio Amatique from Guatemala, and I heard a pop song that said "Amor Impossible," and I thought, wow, I can understand part of this song, which I attributed to the mushrooms expanding my consciousness, but really I knew a little bit of Spanish, so I could understand a couple pretty obvious and cliched words out of this song. At one point, the other guy who was on mushrooms, he said, "I'm going to take a machine gun and shoot all the Guatemalans." And I was like, still a pacifist. I was like, no, don't do that. And then they started eating. And the other guy who was on the mushrooms just ate like it was a normal meal. But for some reason, when I take mushrooms, eating normal food other than maybe fruit strikes me as either yucky, gross, ick, or as in this case, just funny. Like the idea of eating a meal at that time, or at any rate that meal, was funny. And they were like, so I was laughing, and they were like, what's so funny? And drugs, that's what's so funny about it. At a certain point, and I was just sitting in the backyard trying to figure everything out, the meaning of everything. Like, we're all one. So does that mean that the fascist soldiers in Guatemala are all one with us? I guess they must be, because it stands to follow. And at a certain point, I was like, I can't figure this stuff up. I just can't figure it out right now. I'm going to stop trying to. But I couldn't. My mind would not stop trying to figure out the answer to these basically unanswerable questions. And, the real answer is it's a matter of semantics. What do you mean by we're all one? You have to break that down. It's a linguistic issue. That's what I would say now. But at the time, I didn't quite have all those pieces together. So it was just an unsolvable mystery that I could not solve, but I also could not stop trying to solve it. And that was the kind of thing that would happen on psychedelics with me. And although it wasn't a bum trip, it would kind of stop being fun at a certain point often. And then some guys invited us to smoke weed, and the other guy was like, hey, come on, smoke weed with us, and, which might have been a nice little parachute. But I couldn't, because I had vowed not to smoke marijuana again while I was in Belize. And I hadn't vowed anything about mushrooms, but I had vowed about marijuana. So I was like, sorry, no. Yeah. The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. I think I was already I was legalistically looking for loopholes. Yeah, so then what happened? So I wrote a letter. I was I was more bored. Well, there was less to do there. And so I was writing my parents more regularly, which, I wrote something nice to my father, and, I wrote to my mother and stepfather, and I said, yeah, there are rats on the walls, but they're not biting anybody. And then I wrote, and then the oldest guy, not only would he wake up with newspaper shreds in his hair because the rats were tearing them off the walls in order to get at the flour underneath that they use for wallpaper paste, but in addition, one of them did actually bite him. So I wrote another letter and I said, well, now the rats are biting. So I got a letter saying, maybe it's time that you come back to the USA again and have a physical checkup to make sure, just to see what's going on with you, and so forth and so on, which was not bad advice. I was riddled with parasites. But then, and that was right around when I discovered that we all had lice and that they were not interested in doing that much about it. So I was not going to get rid of the lice in this setting. And so one of the boys was going to basically, I have some regrets about not doing more, although, being riddled with parasites was a real thing that I didn't know about most of them. But I had the opportunity to stay on the Bay Islands, which was another Garifuna zone, this time in Honduras, probably the only safe part of Honduras to go to. And I didn't. I wish I had. And then So the youngest boy was going back to stay with his family relatives in Belize City, and I was generally thinking of going back to the USA, which required going back to Belize City. So I went with him, and I was thinking maybe I could stay for with his family. But I went there, and I remember, first of all, when they discovered that he had lice, they were concerned that we had lice. They were concerned, which kind of vindicated me, like I wasn't just some dumb kid freaking out for no reason, which was how they seemed to take it in Rancho. Because to be fair, I had, whatever, I had some of that trait in me. But no, this really was a serious matter to at least the people in cities, or at least in that particular city. And no, I couldn't stay with them. And I do remember one of the women saying, I guess we're going to have to cook up the dog. The dog. Cook up the dog. I had never eaten or seen people eating dog in Belize or anywhere else, for example, for that matter that I know of. Now she might have been kidding, but it's highly likely that she wouldn't, and that they actually were going to cook and eat a dog. All right, well, maybe it's not so bad I didn't stay even for dinner. And I went on my own. And I did find some sort of place to stay. Meanwhile, the 10th of September was coming up, but it was hot, and it was humid, and it was urban, and those combinations of things was making me uncomfortable. And for some reason I had this I just want to move on energy. Now, I had stayed through September 10th, because that is their major holiday, and it would have been fun. And I pretended, I told people I didn't have the money to stay, but I did. By the way, at some point, I think I did break my vow and smoke marijuana again before I left. But I had this open ticket, and I had this time to move on feeling. So what I did, I booked my flight to New Orleans, only to New Orleans this time, because this time I was going back by Greyhound, from New Orleans to, San Francisco. Okay. So I heard that if you mix Coca-Cola with aspirin and shake it up, you will get some kind of a high. So on the day I was going to take my flight, I got this idea to buy 2 codeine with aspirin tablets from a local pharmacy, which I did, and then put it in a bottle of Coke. I bought, I went to some restaurant and got a Coke, and then put the pills in, and then shake it up, which I thought would give me an extra buzz. But all that happened was that some of the, when you shake up a carbonated beverage, some of it shoots out. So all that really happened was I got less of a buzz, because I had lost some of my codeine with aspirin, and even though I drank the rest of the bottle. But I think some of it still got into my system. Boy, I'm almost sorry to leave Belize in my storytelling. Like, I don't want to go. But the reality is, I did go. I got on the plane. I got, I sat next to a white American businessman who had, been living in Belize on and off. And since it was El Salvador, they were giving us wine. So I drank up a fair bit of that. And the guy said he thought I was getting drunk. He didn't know about the codeine as well. But we had a conversation, which is a, kind of guy talk when you're a little drunk, kind of a conversation. And so naturally, we talked about, having sex with the women in Belize. And and I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, so did I. There was a time when I was sleeping with, everything I could get. But how sweet were those little kisses when you kissed those females down there? And I was like, I don't know. Like, really? They didn't seem to be that into kissing? Really? Like, I remember trying to French kiss one of them. Granted, she was young, but she just kind of she didn't do anything. She didn't seem to understand, she didn't try to stop me, but she didn't open her teeth. So the answer was, I guess not that sweet, but so what? Anyway, I got off the train, not the train, the plane in New Orleans, and fortunately, that guy let me ride on the cab with him to his hotel, which was a decent hotel somewhere in New Orleans. And I'm lucky that he did that because this may sound strange, but coming from my year in Central America, I found New Orleans, which was the first American city I went to after coming back, as well as a city I'd never spent any time in before outside of the airport. It was a tough time, and I wasn't able even. Anyway, I'm glad I wasn't wandering around there at night, not knowing where I was going to stay and being buzzed. That's the bottom line. So he let me sleep on the floor of his hotel room, which was fine with me. And then the next morning, we went to we went to the restaurant, and he bought me breakfast and a cup of coffee. And I remember, like, I was immediately going into reverse culture shock. I mean, some of it could have been general culture shock because I'd never hung around and, spent time in New Orleans before. But a lot of it was reverse culture shock of being in the USA in general. And I had a lot of that, which made me kind of sorry I had been in such a hurry to leave. Although ultimately I did have to leave. I mean, I don't know what kind of life I would have lived there if I hadn't left, but that's neither here nor there. I don't spend much time speculating about that, but boy, did I used to. Anyway, he bought me breakfast, including a cup of coffee, and he dumped some kind of white fluid out of a package. into his coffee, and I said, "Is that real milk or cream?" And he said, "I don't know. It just says put in coffee." And I was like, okay. I poured it in my coffee. I drank it. I ate my lunch. And then we parted company, and I went off on my own to do what I always did whenever I was in a new town or city, which was try to find a place to stay. And I think I probably found my way into some local Skid Row cheap hotel kind of place, which was not bad in and of itself, because those were the only kinds of places I could have really afforded to stay in. But I couldn't, because they wouldn't let me. I went to one hotel after another, and they said, "Oh, no, you can't stay here." And I said, "Why?" And they were like, "Look, how old are you? And can I see your ID?" So I showed them my passport. They said, "Yeah, no, you're only 15. You're too young to stay here." And I was like, "What the heck?" Because the thing is, the whole year I had been in Central America, I had never been told that if I had money, I could stay in any hotel, any kind of lodging situation. If I didn't have money, somebody would generally put me up anyway, or I could find somewhere to crash. But I knew it wasn't a good idea, even though I'd been dumb enough to do it in Guatemala City. I knew it was not a good idea to just sleep on the streets here in New Orleans. I just got that vibe. I probably still have my sleeping bag, but And then I went to another hotel, and there was nobody at the office. So I wandered around the hotel looking for someone that was working there, at the office. And there was this room with a piece of board that you could remove and go in. So that's what I did. It turned out there was a guy in there naked. And, I knew that that wasn't good, but I tried to save myself just by saying, "Do you know where the office is?" Which I was hoping communicated to him that I was there for an innocent reason and had just gotten confused. But he didn't take it that way. He said, "Well, you damn sure can't come in here. You damn sure can't break into my room." Bad version of a Louisiana accent. And then I was, okay, and I left, and he was still yelling at me, and he said something like, "You wanted to find what for what?" I think there was some homophobic implication. And then he spit on my head. Yeah. So then I was like, well, F this city of New Orleans, I'm not your native son. And and I'm going to the Greyhound station. Thank you very much. And taking that bus back to San Francisco. As I was headed to the Greyhound station, there was one of those tour guide buses, not buses. It was a horse and carriage, and the guy the guy who was riding it and giving a tour. He said, "I've got extra room in my carriage. You can take the tour for like $2 if you want." And I was like, "No." And he said, $1. And I was like, "No," because I just felt like getting out. There's a second regret. I wish I had gone on that guided tour, so at least I could have seen something nice or interesting about New Orleans, even if it was just a tourist guided tour, other than, you know, that shitty that nice guy, you know, that the nice hotel and the crappy situations with those not nice hotels. So I wish I'd taken that tour, damn it. And when I get to relive my life exactly the same without but with knowing and remembering what I know and remember now, then I will do that if I happen to be in that situation again. That's a persistent fantasy of mine, but of course, everyone wishes they could do that and nobody can. All right. So I go to the Greyhound station and I start on one of those long, like 3-day Greyhound trips, which I had already taken. You know, first of all, I got on that month-long around America trip with my father when I was 11. And then I had gone to and from Nashville, Tennessee to the farm when I was 13. So, you know, these things were not unknown to me. And I think a Greyhound was a little better, had a little more legroom, maybe a little better class of people, believe it or not. And I was also smaller, so I had more legroom, and I was also younger, of course, and so more adaptable. So I got on, and at one point, I got off, and there were these two black guys, American guys. Unfortunately, being in Belize and Livingston for so long had given me a habit. The habit was when I saw white people and talked to them, I talked to them in standard American English. When I saw and spoke to black people, I spoke to them in Belizean Creole and said the things I would have said if I still lived in Belize, and then corrected myself. So one of them said, "Do you happen to have any weed?" Okay, that's part of the reason, because in Belize, everybody called weed. In the US, only black people called it weed back then. He said, "Have you got any weed?" And I said, "No, me no got none." And then I said, "I mean, I don't have any." And he kind of looked at me curious and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "The States," meaning the United States, which I was actually in. And then I said, "I mean to say California." And I think he gave me an odd look and didn't say anything else to me. My mom said, "Oh my God, you're lucky. He might have thought you were making fun of him." And yeah, he might have. I'm lucky that I don't know what he actually thought, but you know, nothing bad came of it. Man. But even while I was still in New Orleans, I had also been having, as I said, reverse culture shock about everything, like being in an American city, like everything's covered with concrete. There's cars and traffic everywhere. Everything's big. The money is only green, which is boring. Why can't they have more colors of money? I thought. And basically, it was kind of uncomfortable for me. Yeah, it was. I was starting to go through reverse culture shock immediately. So anyhow, once again, I arrive back in San Francisco, and I guess my parents picked me up. I mean, I probably could have gotten there by myself. Maybe I did, but one way or another, I got back to Sausalito, California, across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. And since it is already an hour and a half long, woo-wee, I should start ending things. I should start ending this video. Yup. Goodbye.